exporters are already committed, but the demand for wood is growing strongly. The CSIR is busy with long-term research on the possibility of using indigenous tree species as replacements for exotic species, and according to results, some indigenous trees may be more viable economically in terms of maintenance and water usage. Let's find out more.
The motivation behind this project was to look for potential alternative sources of timber for South Africa that didn't have an unduly negative impact on water resources. We know that the need for forest products and for timber resources in this country is still growing, and yet a lot of the catchments are closed to further forestry because of water resource impacts. However, there's tremendous potential, I believe, in indigenous tree species to fulfill some of the requirements for the wood needs in South Africa, and yet to have very limited ecological impacts, sometimes even positive ecological impacts. We're looking primarily at the water use of these indigenous tree species. And we want to compare the data that we're getting from these indigenous trees with data that we already have for exotic plantation species. A lot of work has been done in the past on the exotic plantation species because of their water use impacts, and yet nobody has researched the water use of indigenous tree species, and this is an area of research that we need to focus on. Combined with that, we're also looking at the growth rates of indigenous trees, and this allows us to evaluate the economic potential in terms of the amount of wood they can produce, and also in terms of the water use efficiency, how efficiently they use water over a particular time period. We have instrumentation that can measure the actual water use of trees. We implant probes into the trees and measure rates of sap flow through the stem of the tree. Other instrumentation that we have, we mount on towers above forest canopies. That measures total evaporation rates from the plantations or the natural forests. This allows us to evaluate exactly how much water the trees are using. And then combined with those measurements, we take detailed growth measurements of the trees and over time, and we can evaluate then water use, growth, and water use efficiency. We've had approximately 5 years of this project running, and we've looked at a number of indigenous species, and we found that universally they have all used significantly less amounts of water than the average exotic tree species that we've measured in the past. On the other hand, the growth rates are slower as well, so that needs to be taken into account. But if we look at the economic value of the wood and the wood products from indigenous trees, that's usually higher than exotic species. Some of the challenges that we experience are firstly site selection. We need to choose appropriate sites that will provide the species that we are interested in to measure. These are often remote and in fairly inaccessible areas where we need to get to. And the amount of data that's produced by this instrumentation is tremendous. It's a big challenge just keeping on top of the data, number crunching, and analysing it. But you need to keep up to date with that. Looking forward in this research program, we're wanting to expand the number of indigenous tree species that we're measuring. We want to measure indigenous tree species in different environments in South Africa so that we can get an understanding of how they use water in different environments. And also, it's important to do site species matching so that we know which indigenous tree species grow well in which areas. Because emanating from this work will be recommendations as to which indigenous tree species are most appropriate to plant, and we need to be able to give recommendations on the best areas to plant them in.
It's nearly time.